Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Max Ipinge. Today's topic is the Treaty of Versailles and its impacts. We are going to talk about some subtopics in the about the Treaty of Versailles and its impacts. They are as follows: discuss the motives and aims of the Big Three at Versailles, explain why all the victors did not get everything that they wanted, discuss the impact of the peace treaty on Germany up to 1923, and evaluate whether the treaty could be justified at the time. Before we move on to the Treaty of Versailles, we first have to understand what it was. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in June 1919 in Paris, France at the end of World War I, was a peace settlement between the countries that lost the war, including Germany and the victorious Allies. The Treaty of Versailles was the most important agreement that came out of 1919 Paris, France. The peace settlement terms were imposed by the Big Three on Germany for starting the war. The Germans criticized the terms of the treaty because they felt it was too harsh towards them and it was unfair for them to be blamed solely for starting the war. This treaty planted seeds for the next war as the Germans decided to take revenge. Who were the Big Three? Now, firstly, they were originally known as the Big Four, but Vittorio Orlando of Italy was not included in the Big Three. The Big Three consisted of Woodrow Wilson, who was the President of the United States, George Clemenceau, who was the Prime Minister of France, and David Lloyd George, who was the Prime Minister of Britain. These three played an important role in deciding and making rules on what the Treaty of Versailles should be about. Pardon me, sorry. The Big Three played a huge role in deciding on the punishment of Germany.
This is Simbula Tracy, continuing with the Big Three's aims. We are going to start looking at Woodrow Wilson's. Wilson wanted to build a better and a more peaceful world. He believed that the 14 points could save the world from future wars. He thought that a permanent international organization, the League of Nations, would be able to maintain world peace. He presented 14 points, which he intended to be the basis for the peace treaty. Wilson's 14 points mainly focused on avoiding another war by disarming countries and not punishing countries that lost the war too harshly, for example, Germany. George Clemenceau from France had very different views from Wilson. France had suffered badly during the war because most of the First World War took place on French soil and the French people were bitter. Clemenceau feared the power and the aggression of Germany. He wanted revenge and to keep Germany as weak as possible so that it could never ever be able to start another war. He wanted to create a buffer state between France and Germany. He wanted to permanently demilitarize Germany and for Germany to pay reparations to France for the damage that it had caused for the war. Lloyd David George of Britain was a practical and a clever politician. At the peace talks, he often took a moderate position. He realized that weakening Germany's economy by asking for large reparations would not be in Europe's best interest. He wanted a moderate peace with Germany as he realized that a harsh treaty would make Germany want revenge. And he did not want Germany's economy crippled too weak because he wanted trade between the two countries to continue. Finally, he wanted Germany to lose its navy and its colonies because he believed that this threatened the British Empire, which was based on its naval power.
My name is Kutwaha Kahona. I'm going to carry on. I'm going to discuss why all the victors did not get everything they wanted out of the peace treaty. The different aims of the Big Three made the negotiations of the peace treaty very difficult. The treaty had to satisfy the French, who wanted security against the possibility of Germany regaining its power. It also had to satisfy the British public's demands for punishment of Germany and Wilson's commitment to an independent Poland with access to the sea. And it soon became clear that the different objectives of the Big Three could not be met. Wilson wanted to use the power and influence on the US to create a world based on justice and peace. This was on the basis of his 14 points. He regarded Clemenceau's demands as vindictive and thought that they were against morality and the principle of national independence. Clemenceau had little patience with Wilson's idealism, particularly because the USA had not suffered as much as France during the war. However, he was a realist and he recognized that Germany could not have been defeated without the help of the United States. And this is a picture of the Big Three at the peace treaty. Now we are going to focus on the impact of the peace treaty on Germany up to 1923. The German army was reduced to 100,000 men, and they were not allowed to have any submarines, aeroplanes, and were only allowed to have 6 battleships. There was widespread unemployment, and the German trade and industry was shuttered after the war. The reparation payment was a heavy burden for the Germans, and this caused the Germans to fail to pay an installment in 1922. They claimed that they were willing to pay but could not. The Allies was unhappy about it, and in 1923, France and Belgium troops invaded the Ruhr to enforce the payment of the reparations by seizing coal, iron, and steel as payment in kind. The workers went on a passive strike to resist the foreign troops. In the halt in industrial production caused the German economy to collapse, due to the fact that they were printing money that had no value, to which caused hyperinflation. Germany lost 10% of its land and a certain amount of its population that were forced to live in other countries.
Continuing with Petrina Nenkete, I'm going to run you through the last subtopic, which says, pardon me, I'm going to run you through the last objective, which asks us to describe if the treaty was justified at the time. The people of Victoria's nation, particularly Britain and France, felt that Germany was responsible for the war and should be punished. They also felt that Germany should pay for all the damage and destruction caused by the war. Apart from the United States, the countries involved in the war were exhausted. The economies and industry were in bad state, particularly in Britain and France. As we all know, this war took place in French land and the damage was mostly in their nation. Millions of young men, both sides, have died. Ordinary civilians have faced food shortage, village towns, and in large area of Belgium and France have been completely destroyed. Although there have been no fighting in Britain, the large number of war casualties affected public opinion. Almost every family in Britain have lost someone in the fighting. People demanded a harshly peace settlement with Germany. While the harshness of the Treaty of Versailles might be understandable, it was not a success. Its purpose was to ensure that Germany would never ever again threaten the peace treaty of Europe, and in this, it failed. How did it fail? The treaty was harsh enough to make the Germany angry, but it was not harsh enough to keep the Germans from trying to overthrow it. Because 20 years later, the treaty was signed, Britain and France were once again at war with Germany.
Doing the conclusion is Lloyd and Inomari. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in Paris in 1919 at the end of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles was the most important agreement that came out of the 1919 Paris Peace Conference. The big three were France, British, and UK. They wanted to make sure that Germany was punished. It aimed at making Germany accept the blame for starting the war and how the state ought to be punished, and this led to the Reparation Bill. Germans criticized the treaty because they felt it was too harsh on them, because their armed force were reduced to 100,000 soldiers in their army, and also they were not allowed to have any submarine, any aeroplanes, and only 6 battleships. Overseas empires were also taken away, and the colony became mandates of the UK and France. This placed a heavy burden on the Germans' economy. This treaty planted seeds for the next World War II. Because 20 years after the treaty was signed, Britain and France were once again at war with Germany.
Thank you for attending our class. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Bye.